This episode of From Angel to Exit is brought to you by Align 5. Align 5 specializes in mergers and acquisitions for growth-focused entrepreneurs and family businesses. With decades of buy and sell side experience, they prioritize client alignment, avoiding conflicts of interest common in other firms. Align 5 delivers above average industry results by customizing strategies for diverse industries, ensuring optimal valuations and securing strategic acquisitions or exit partners. If you want to find out more, check out align5.com. That's align, the number 5.com. Are you serious about planning a successful business exit? From Angel to Exit is your go-to resource. Subscribe to our newsletter at eckfeldt.com/podcast for even more valuable insights. And to get personalized guidance, take our free exit readiness assessment. It's just 24 questions, and it will give you a clear picture of your exit readiness. Find the assessment at eckfeldt.com/exit. Submit your results, and we'll schedule a free follow-up call to discuss your specific situation and the best way to maximize your valuation and ensure a successful transaction. Now, back to the episode. Welcome, everyone. This is From Angel to Exit. I'm Bruce Eckfeldt. I'm your host. Our guest today, David Turner, is CEO of Velocity Now. We're going to talk about his experience in the exit world, having worked with many, many companies and founders and experiences in the exit process. Really interesting kind of background and working with companies on value and culture and how that really is going to drive growth, is going to drive performance. Excited for this conversation and excited to hear his insights. So with all that, David, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Bruce. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Before we dive into all things related, exits and valuation stuff, we'd love to just get a little personal background and professional background. Give us a sense, like, how did you start in this world? What were the experiences that you have? Give us the story.
Yeah, great. Well, I won't bore you with the nitty-gritty details from second grade, but I started in the software space many moons ago, and really got started in my experience that I use today when we sold the company, a company in 2003 to a privately held company at the time called IHS. And it was an incredibly acquisitive company. From 2003 to 2012, we did 47 acquisitions.
Wow.
And we went public in 2006. And so just hyperscale growth with, of course, organically, but also inorganic through the volume of acquisitions. We went from 320 million during that time to 1.8 billion. It continued to go after I left in 2012 with more acquisitions. I think they ended up doing about 180 before they sold to S&P Global a couple of years ago for $44 billion. So just massive shareholder
Those are
value.
amazing numbers.
Yeah, it's one of the unknown, quote unquote unicorns that from the last couple decades. But just international, did a lot of business all over the world, which was incredibly fun and educational, and had a great time doing that. And of course, through the acquisitions, you just got to see a huge volume of 10, 15, $20 million companies, and how their journey from startup until when they exited. And so I did due diligence on 120, 130 companies during that time, and then executed on 47 of those. And then I went to, after 2012 at IHS, I went to become the CRO at another publicly traded company, Digital Globe, satellite company, that at the time and still today is the largest owner and operator of high-resolution Earth observation satellites, the highest resolution in the commercial. They were the first company to launch a commercial satellite that took incredibly high-resolution pictures of the Earth's surface and did a digital inventory of that Earth's surface with billions and billions of pixels and square miles of how the Earth landscape changes. And we did that for companies like Google and Apple that were developing maps around the world. And then we also did it for defense purposes to help our allies spy on their neighbors. During that time, we did a handful of acquisitions as well there and doubled the size of the revenue of that company. And then I left to get back into a CEO role, which I was before IHS, and did a roll up in the private equity space. And we acquired 5 companies and put them together. And then I exited that in 2019 and then started formally my executive coaching practice, which I'd been doing informally for a handful of years before that. So to quickly fast forward to today, I've got almost 11,000 hours of C-level coaching, and I coach. My model is to coach CEOs in his or her direct reports. That's kind of most of my clients, and it's a mix of private equity backed and publicly traded companies, ranging from 5 million in revenue to 14 billion in revenue. So it's really running the gamut on small, mid-size, and some large publicly traded companies.
Yeah. So a lot of things we can dive into here. I think maybe some grounding kind of discussion I think would be helpful for folks. I guess, how do you organize, or how do you kind of segment the world of M&A in terms of size of company or type of acquisition? Like what's kind of some variables that you use to kind of, take this very large kind of world and kind of bucket it?
Well, I tell you, it's very time dependent, isn't it? I mean, M&A in 2024 is not M&A in 2019, and not even M&A in 2015. So I feel like every year that whole world changes, and it's actually becoming more and more narrow too, in terms of just with capital markets, with a lot of gun shy private investors, gun shy private equity investors. I think that's kind of a little bit of a under the radar not rumor mill, but maybe based on a lot of fact that private equity companies are struggling more than they're willing to say about how they're turning returns on their investment within the normal 4 to 5 year hold cycle. So a lot of private equity companies are getting to that 6, 7, 8 years, a little long with the fund, because it's just more and more challenging to grow, competition. Buying.
Is this because? So generally they want to have roughly a 5-year return, right? They take investors' money, and they have some kind of commitment of you're going to get this back with your returns within 5 years. So they're stretching this out. And is this because there's more competition for the companies? Is this there's less companies to actually do acquisitions around? Like what makes it challenging?
I think, well, one thing for sure, private equity is now buying from private equity, right? And so they've kind of doubled the risk and the tolerance for trying to get the return. So I think it's just a more crowded landscape. It's less companies are growing at the rates that private equity companies want. I do think there's a lot of nail biters and competition, and just selling in 2024 is way harder than it was 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago. Companies are buying different. Companies have to sell different, and then they're not adapting quick enough to sell. So you're just seeing slower growth rates on average. Right. And so I just think that there's a lot of dry powder sitting on the sidelines, but I'm just not seeing the volume that I would see. And I think that's kind of what you hear as well. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I'm curious, when you got into this, when you first started in business, was this something you wanted to do? Like, you were going to be in, corporate development and on the M&A side? How did this kind of come to you, or what was the story there?
Well, it's a good question, because I didn't, listen, I was a lost kid in college, right? Who did not have any career plans except to major in be really good at the social aspect of college. I'm not saying I was dumb, but I definitely wasn't very studious, and was not going to go to the Deloittes or the Arthur Andersons, and I wasn't going to get my MBA because I wanted to get out and make money. But I started on the sales side, and I think the real turning point in my career was at IHS. After I'd been running this small business unit for a few years, we went public, and so we had this new currency. Instead of doing 2 or 3 acquisitions a year, we were going to start doing 2 to 3 a quarter. It was really ramping up. And so the CEO came to me and said, you're running a good business unit. You're doing well. You're kind of the jack of all trades. You got the sales, you got the operations, you're doing partnerships, you got the international angle, but you really need some help. You're not quite there. Of course, I was young in my career, and I'm like, you're right, I do. And so he hired an executive coach for me, and I, for the next 9 years, 4 hours a month, like clockwork, I got executive coaching from a very successful ex-GE president, who'd been the president and CEO of a bunch of GE businesses, and was and I just got so lucky. So I just, absorbed everything. And that's when I started to expand out, getting ready for my next big CEO role. And then the acquisitions were just coming, because I just happened to be there at that time. And I was tasked with going out, finding those companies, doing the due diligence, closing it, and then integrating those into our business. And so I think I probably lucked into it more than anything, to be honest. And then you kind of gravitate to what you know and your strengths. And so now I do a lot of M&A advisory work through my coaching, but my passion is really still just the core of helping executives to grow, be self-aware, be self-discovery, diluting the delusion, which is probably the number one responsibility, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about today.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a fabulous opportunity because I think most of the folks listening to this are on the other side. They have the companies and they're looking to exit, someday. It could be in the near future, it could be just in the distant future. But I think it'd be really interesting to kind of give them kind of an understanding of what happens on the other side of the table. Like, so when a company is out there looking for acquisitions, I guess my first question is why? Like, why do companies participate or actually go out and look to acquire companies? Like, what's the strategic value and what are they hoping to achieve with that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first on that, I think this is maybe a little other tidbit that people aren't willing to admit, but most companies go out to acquire, whether you're strategic or you're a platform within a private equity, because you're struggling with organic growth. Let's just be honest, right?
Yeah.
So they're looking for that supplement of the inorganic growth. And of course, the hope and the vision is if we can just get more of this inorganic in, and then we can either arbitrage or figure out how to lay in our shared services efficiencies. But I think the number one reason is people are just looking for a different lever. If you're public, of course, you can buy shares back, right? That's an option. And if you're public or private, you can reinvest that cash capital or debt into product. But I think that the sexier thing to do is M&A. And I think people get kind of roped into thinking that is the cool thing to do, the thing you want to talk about. You've done all this M&A work, which is way more exciting than say, we did some share buybacks, right? That's just not very fun.
Exactly.
And so I think there's, that's kind of what drives a lot of it is just the search for accelerated organic growth or inorganic to try to turn it into organic within a few years.
Yeah. And, do companies, I'm always kind of curious how companies what kind of results they're looking for. In some cases, it's purely a financial. It's like, hey, we have to deploy some capital. We can just boost our balance sheet. We can look at revenue. In other cases, it's a little more strategic where it's like, hey, we've got a gap either in terms of capabilities or technology or geography or, segments or industries. Like how do you kind of, I guess, organize the types of M&A from the buy side, right? Like in terms of, and how does that change? Like when you're going out for just pure financials versus kind of augmenting or filling in gaps?
Yeah. Again, if you're private equity and you've got, if that's what you do for a living and you've got a platform company and you're rolling up companies under that, then you know that there is potentially a volume game with the roll up, right? And so I think that's one angle is literally don't just go out and do these little acquisitions here and there over a 4 or 5 year period, because that really doesn't work. It's too hard. There's way more of a lift than people think. You don't get the synergies that you think. They become, a $5 million acquisition is the same lift as a $50 million acquisition. Yeah. But the capital's easier on a smaller deal. It's a tuck in. And I think that companies, really struggle with understanding the difference between a volume roll up, like what I've done in the past, and to be honest, you get on the treadmill, and if you do the volume, you can start to hide some of the shortfalls in some of the acquisitions. And I don't mean like in an unethical way or against GAAP principles.
You just smooth it out.
Yeah, you just kind of smooth it out, right? And so I think the thing is, you either are going out and really trying to find that one strategic adjacency that you are missing to try to get more wallet share or market share in a like you said, a geo or with a customer base or whatever, or you're just kind of going out and playing the arbitrage game against the cost synergies and trying to do the volume, right? Yeah. I actually, believe it or not, I actually think it's easier to do the volume, but you have to know what you're doing, right? And the problem with most of these companies that are trying on the buy side is they think they know what they're doing because they've done one or they've done two, or they have the private equity guys behind them that have done a bunch. But when they get into it, and including us at IHS, we were doing 3 a quarter. Let me tell you, it was not easy, and we were doing huge volumes. Now, I will say what I always tell people is the first 20 I did, I learned an enormous amount of what not to do. Yeah. Then the next 30 I kind of started developing the playbook of what to do. But it took 20 to get there.
Yeah. Yeah, and that few companies actually get that kind of volume of
Few
M&A.
companies and few executives,
Yeah,
right? You go out and you look at a startup who's, trying to do maybe get acquired by somebody or has some capital to do like little tuck-in. They just don't have the experience. And this is where experience does pay off, because the number of lessons learned on the negative side is way more than on the positive side until you get to a volume.
yeah. And how does this work internally for the buy company? Like, is there a strategic planning session where they say, okay, look, this is what we're going to go after, these segments, we want to do X number of transactions at this dollar volume? They give you a war chest? Like, I'm just fascinated on how a company actually approaches this kind of mechanically from a business point of view.
Yeah, well, okay. Another kind of truth that really happens, right? Okay, and this is maybe this is a story about the myths that exist out there. And again, I can say that I know that the myths are not true because I see it every day and I live it every day.
Yeah.
But you start out. Here's the criteria: we want to buy X dollars of EBITDA. We want to, in these segments or in these sectors, with this type of business, with this type of business model, this SaaS or recurring or reoccurring or whatever. Then you go out and you spend a year. And trust me, I've seen countless companies do that, and they try to find that company in that criteria, which may be a range, and then they realize they're not actionable, or they get to the finish line and there's a skeleton in the closet, and then they say, "Oh, it's not right." Then they go 2 years and they've got a big whiff. They just haven't been able to close it. Then they go back and say, "Okay, we just need to go out and see what's actionable, and we'll make it work." I mean, and we did that even again at IHS. I mean, we had the strict criteria. We stayed pretty good at it. And the thing about it is once you get a reputation and you got the stock price, went from $16 to $142, and people are coming in at $80 stock price, and they see it came from 16 2 years. Then they're like, "Okay, I'll ride that wave," and then they're willing to take a little bit less, and they'll become actionable. Because, but I do think it's a needle in a haystack for a lot of companies out there. And when you really start to, even if you have all the dry powder and all the green in the world, you go out and you start knocking on doors. It's not as big as people think until you start moving out into like adjacencies that are probably one or two removed from where you thought you were going to be.
Yeah. Yeah. How does that work? Like, how do you actually find companies? I mean, is this you're picking up the phone and just dialing numbers? Is this partnerships? Like, what is the actual process? Once you've kind of have this investment thesis or a plan, actually engaging the market and finding these opportunities and sort of uncovering them and starting the conversations. What does that look like?
Yeah. And I think that's a good story for the potential, listeners today, which is, you cannot say, on January the 1st of 2025, I'm going to go out to market and then think that you're going to find that perfect match. I mean, you use the iBankers. Don't get me wrong. That's the shortcut. It's an expensive route, but sometimes you have to have it. But you've got to develop, over a period of years, really, starting to knock on the door of strategic, starting to knock on the doors of the private equity that are maybe in that space or in that industry, and start to develop those relationships way before you actually want to go to market, right? And the sourcing is hard. I mean, I do think when you're in an industry, I've got a client that's in the insurance industry, and they kind of know the space incredibly well, right? And so they've already knocked on those doors. They've got those relationships, and so there's a lot of warm leads out there. But otherwise, you just go the shortcut route, pay the money, and have the iBankers bang the phones through sourcing.
Yeah. And is that what they do? Like, I'm always kind of curious. I mean, iBankers, it's like, oh yeah, they must have all these, but it's a rough business.
It's a rough business, and there's a bunch of green beans that are dialing for dollars, right? Yeah. Dialing for acquisitions. And there are, I mean, if you take kind of that small to mid-size, I mean, I don't know how many companies in the US that are in that, 1 to 100 million, but there's a lot, right? Yeah. And so I do think that it ends up being the guys at the either iBank or at the private equity that are kind of early in their career, they bang the phones until they can get somebody interest. Now, granted, I think that's a little bit of a long shot. I think you've really got to start to target and really talk to customers as a buyer or as a platform company, talk to customers to see who else they're using that might be that adjacency that you may or may not know about, and then go try to find a warm lead versus just the cold calls.
Yeah. Yeah. And how I know on the sell side, right, that sort of the ideal scenario is you present yourself, you create a bit of a market, you filter that market down to a set of, interested buyers, you do LOIs, you kind of get it done, but you want to create some type of somewhat competitive bidding, or at least multiple interests kind of party kind of situations. What is it like on the other side? From a buy side, what does this process look like in terms of how do you kind of align things, or what's the best scenario to be able to kind of get the best deal or find the right opportunity?
Well, I think on the buy side that, answering to blind requests for LOIs is a little bit of a long shot. And also the way that the process works, is you end up you get a SIM, you get the deck, you kind of read through it, and then you throw out a number, and it's a blind number, right? You don't know what your competitors, and I've been on boards, and it's like you get anywhere between, I think the last one I did, it was like between 275 and like 450 or something. So, and then what do? You go to the 400 to 450 and you say, okay, you kind of made it to the next process, but the buyer still doesn't know that much about the company, right? So that's why I think that, on the sell side, we got away from like doing auctions or bids, and we targeted approach. And what we did on the buy side is we said, okay, we want to get into the chemical information business. So we did the research, either paid or in-house, to say who are the top 3 companies in the chemical information space. We had a phenomenal story, and we would call the CEO and say, here's the story to join IHS. And it worked. It worked very well. But that was an advantage because we were the 800-pound gorilla in the information space.
Yeah. Interesting. And when you are actually looking at companies, I'm kind of curious how you evaluate and how much of this is kind of strategic and, is this the right fit based on what we're trying to do in the company? And how much of this is just fundamentals and like, okay, we're looking for kind of, good leadership, good management, good financials, right? Like processes, things like that. How do you evaluate those things, and how do you prioritize that?
It's a good question, and I'm going to say, from my point of view, it becomes more of an art than a science. For me, now, granted, the science gets you to the plate with them, i.e., the models, the SIM deck, the growth rates, the EBITDA, the operating levers, and that gets you to what I would say is the dinner table the night before the potential first round of due diligence or fireside chats. And then, I can't tell you, I remember specifically so many times going to dinner with the CEO or the owners. And by the end, I could predict very highly whether we were going to do the deal just based on the dinner, much less the financials and the Excel spreadsheets and all that kind of stuff. So it's like you get a feel for culturally, are they a fit? Do they know the business? Do they have conviction on the upside? Or are they kind of looking are they trying to leave the business and are they trying to get into a better home, and so you kind of suss that out at the dinner, not at the boardroom table.
Yeah. Yes, it always reminds me of like Gottman Institute and relationship and couples, where Gottman could watch a couple discuss for like 15 minutes and could predict 90% accuracy if they're going to be divorced in 3 years, just because of these fundamental kind of dynamics that you see at the table.
And I'll tell you another prediction. Again, don't have quite the volume that Gottman, but I know that study and it's phenomenal. But I did. Generally speaking, when we would acquire companies, and when my clients are acquiring companies, they generally try to keep the CEO or the founder in some sort of role, either to lead the BU, to lead a P&L, or whatever. And with high degree of success and prediction, I could say in 1 year whether that person was going to be there or not. And I will tell you, the 47 acquisitions that we made, we kept a lot of the founders and CEOs. And after more than a year, there was only 1 or 2 people that were left.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting. We've had a lot of conversation around this whole, staying on and, whether there's an earn-out capability or you're keeping equity in and you want to, it is I do find it's fundamentally different being a founder and growing and scaling a company than it is to be an executive inside of a larger leadership team that's, more on corporate growth. And I always find it interesting. I don't often suggest that founders try to stay on because they're cut from a different cloth at some level.
Listen, I think that statement is what you should keep advising, because statistically speaking, that is the right approach. And I will say that, I was the CEO of 2 startups over my 27 year. I was terrible. Okay. I am not a startup CEO. Put me into a CEO of a $50 to $1 billion company, $50 million to $1 billion, that has a decent starting point and just needs. That is my specialty. And on the flip side, right? I mean, the people that are really, really good at that startup and entrepreneur, then they get into the beast, even though it may not be a beast, maybe just twice as big, they flounder. And so I think that's probably one of the number one messages I'd like to give to, founders that are looking today is do not be delusional. About earnouts. Don't be delusional about how you're going to fit into this new world. Don't be delusional that you're going if you roll over, not forget an earnout, if you roll over your equity, that's going to be your big upside. You need to there's so much delusion that needs to be diluted from a founder perspective.
One of the conversations I have is we do the numbers and figure out, okay, what do you really want? What's going to make you happy? What are you going to do with it? What do you need? All that stuff. And then I say, look, if you're not going to get that at signing, don't take the deal. Because anything that's going to happen after signing is at risk, and if you need it, it now becomes handcuffs, 100%. And you don't want to be in handcuffs. That is 100%. What founders hate being.
Yeah, and listen, I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I was one of those that rolled into a bigger company, and it worked, right? And I'm thankful because I got out of where I wasn't good and got into where I was good. So there are situations. I don't want to say that it's everybody. I'm just speaking from statistics that you're either kind of a entrepreneur, startup type CEO, or you're a scaler of a business. I mean, and some people, Mark Zuckerberg has obviously been the poster child for crossing that, but like there's not a lot of others out there.
Very much so. I'm curious, when you are having sort of dinners or you're having these conversations with CEOs and you're thinking about acquisition, what are the things that come up that you look for in terms of, either that, is going to tell you that that's going to be a good acquisition, or that founder is going to actually be an asset to the company post-transaction? Like, are there specific things you're kind of noticing or looking out for?
Well, I think it's the indirect things that you gather. What they don't say more than what they do say, how they say it, in the tone and when they bring it up and how they bring it up and the conviction they have behind that. And then the other thing is this an opinion? In fact, I'll give you an example. I was talking to the CEO of a startup this morning and looking at their projections, and shocker, the hockey stick happens a year from now. And I'm like, okay, but what, the question is not whether you are excited about those projections and tell me all the activity that's but what are the tangible, proven green shoots, investments, pipeline, partnerships that are almost at the dotted line, signing, that are going to give you, justify that, right? And so I think, and then how they describe it, listen, these are projections, but here are the things that we're doing, and here's what we feel like is reasonable, and here's what's a stretch. That's a better conversation than I have no doubt we're going to double the revenue, right? And that's when you're like, that's when the red flags come up, right? So I do think that how you tell the story as a founder or someone who's selling the business to the buyer, how you tell it, the way you tell it is going to matter more than you think. And I'll give you one other example. We were looking many years ago, but looking at a very transformational acquisition for our company to get us into a very hot space around environmental, back when climate change, not to say it's not hot now, but there was a time when there was a lot of climate change M&A. And this company was phenomenal. They were the leader. And, we went through all the due diligence. I knew that the founder was going to be a risk because he was very arrogant. And he just came across that you're lucky to have me versus like, we're looking forward to joining you. And everything was done. And then we have the last meeting the night before with the CEO. And the minute he walked in the door and how he approached the CEO, our CEO that was the buyer, I'm like, this deal's done. And it was done. He walked in and says, I'm not doing that deal. And I was like, and there was a lesson for me, like, geez, this guy was going to make a crap load of money overnight. And he just lost it based on the tone, tact, and timing of how I approached the CEO.
Yeah. It is, I'm always impressed at the end of the day, how much of business is personal interaction,
totally.
Right? Like everything look amazing on paper. You can have the best spreadsheets, you can have these decks. But if you can't develop the right relationships in this world, they won't get done. It won't happen.
On the buyer side and the seller side. I'll give you another example, and I'll have to figure out how to make sure this doesn't come back to me because I have to be careful about this. But okay, let me just put it into another third part. I had a situation where a hired gun operator was going to be the CEO of a roll-up for a private equity. And he signed on with them. And the private equity guys said, we've got 3 deals that we're about to close. And you're going to come on, you're going to run those companies, and you're going to do more acquisitions. And so the CEO was like, that's great. Yeah, it's nice not to have to do all the sourcing to get started with the platform company. So they go, the CEO that was going to be hired, that the private equity was going to lead the roll-up, goes and meets with 3 of the acquisitions and the private equity. And it was a great meeting. There was lots of wine. Everybody was like, so then the CEO to be called the CEO, the 2 founders of the 2 biggest companies. And both of them said, no way am I selling to those private equity guys. And it was like, and the private equity guys said it was pretty much a done deal. But the point is, they just got rubbed the wrong way, right? And so I think that's what you also have to realize is that a lot of sellers that have put their heart, soul, mind, and life into it, they do want to pass it on to somebody who's going to take care of the asset, right? Absolutely. And not just be the spreadsheet of arbitrage or whatever.
Yeah. I'm curious on the deals themselves. When you're going through due diligence, what what typically comes up that either kills a deal or makes a deal more complicated than it needed to be, or hurts valuation, or extends the time frame? I mean, because the things that come up that people that are earlier in the process might be able to do something about, or at least anticipate at some level. I'm curious what you've seen.
Well, first of all, there is no such thing as a perfect marriage, and there is no such thing as a potential acquisition that has not a single skeleton in the closet. Right. So I think as a buyer, an experienced buyer, you know that there are going to be some loose ends, some things that contracts at risk, or some, debt here and there or whatever. And I think a lot of buyers think that they hesitate either in going out to sell, or they're not confident in their story because they don't want this one little bruise to kind of jump to the front. So I guess another message for the potential sellers and entrepreneurs that are looking to transact is, don't worry about because everybody has it. It's okay. Now if it's a fundamental, if you've got some sort of regulation coming down the pipe that's going to wipe out the business, but the people aspect, listen, if you're acquiring a mid-sized company with 300, 400, 500 people, and the culture is crap, and you have to completely turn it around, that's just going to extend a little bit in terms of the return, right? But it's fixable. But I think the big thing is just risk in large contracts, risk in customer concentration, risk in competition that are going to outflank or leapfrog. But those are the things. But I think that those are, we walked away from very few deals out of the ones that we really went into deeper due diligence, because we would keep finding things. But in the end, if you think it's good enough, or you can get the return that's good enough, then you do the deal and you try to fix it.
Yeah. And would you recommend for the sellers that I don't want to be too leading on this, but they just get that stuff out there early, right? It's like, okay, here are the things that we've got to figure out how to deal with, be open up front. And because sometimes I find that the problem is not so much that I have some things that are issues, it's that issues start coming in, dripping in over time. And now buyers are just like, okay, I don't know when the next one's going to come. And is that all of them or not? Whereas if you can just put them all on the table and say, hey, look, these are the things we have to deal with. Let's talk.
100%. And again, I will tell you that might have a little bit of caveat. If you've got a very inexperienced buyer that is on their first deal, either as a CEO of a platform company or early deal, I still agree with that, but you got to realize that it might just fall through real quick. But better to fall through quick than to take forever and then fall through. And that's another. I'm dealing with another company right now, and again, this one I have to be very careful. But as a buyer, when we would go out and we were doing these 3 a quarter. I mean, we from the time we made that first call to the time the deal was closed was anywhere between 30 and 60 days.
Wow.
Okay.
That's
and
tight,
buyers out there that have this, that say, we'll try to get that done within a 6-month period. That is absolutely detrimental to the company buying, because you get distracted, and it's really, really hard on the company that is selling, because if the deal doesn't go through, then the problem is all that lost time and lack of focus and the purgatory uncertainty or whatever doesn't show up for 6 months later.
Yeah.
And I've seen that a million times. So I always tell my clients that are in the acquisition mode, I don't care. You can get the deal done in 60 days.
Yeah.
If you're good and you're dedicated and you know how to run the playbook of due diligence, do not stretch it out. And then on the flip side, if you're a seller, you need to force these 60 to 90 day deals and then bring out the skeletons early, put it on the table. And it's the whole thing of high probability selling. Here's what I got. You want it? Great. If you don't, I'm moving on.
Yeah, exactly. Let's find someone else. I'm curious, and I'm not trying to figure out how to ask this in terms of what are things sellers can do, or what are insights you can give us around the buyers that can help the sellers do a better job or be more successful, either in terms of getting the transaction done or valuation or terms? Like what would some insights be that would be helpful for sellers?
This is a little bit of a soft thing. For some people it's hard, for some people it's easy, but you've got to tell the story consistently and in a salesy type of way. And you can't, I'm not saying you rehearse it like it needs to be robotic, but you can't develop the story the day or two before you go and make the pitch. The story needs to be developed over time. And that's why I always tell my clients that are looking to sell in 2 to 3 years, start crafting the story today, because you need time to run the reps of telling the story to where it becomes believable, it becomes credible, and people buy into it. Because I can tell when people are fumbling through stories. And it doesn't mean necessarily the business is bad.
Yeah, no.
It just means they don't have a crisp, consistent way of telling the value of the company. And I think that a lot of companies just wait, or founders wait till they're about to go to market, and that's just too late.
Yeah. Well, and let's talk about that. Like, what's time frame? What do you think? If a founder, owner, is sort of thinking about selling at some point, like, what's the time frame that they should really be starting to really kind of take some action, putting together some plans, doing some of this work? Like, what kind of runway or what kind of phase would you suggest that they go through in that?
I know that it's not easy, okay, but I've also seen it be easy if you have good buyers and the good people in between, lawyers and bankers or whatever. You can grease the skids, but I think a beginning to end target should literally be 4 to 6 months. You go out to a process and you push it through, even when you're not 100% with a deck or something or the data room or whatever. You need to push it through, because time is not on your side on both sides. So I think 4 to 6 month process to either run a process, get the bids, or find the likely buyers, have the fireside chats over the course of 3 days, back to back every 2 hours, versus stretching out over 3 weeks to accommodate the schedule. That's why this is very distracting for a business, right? And then a transact or don't, right? But I'll tell you another secret is when I used to look at the due diligence decks, and I would sit down with the CEOs at the night before and said, did you guys go out to market 3 years ago? And they're like, how do you see that in our financials? We don't talk about that, but it's very clear, because there's that 6 month delay. And then you wake up and people were either frozen or they got distracted. They weren't running the business. Then you see a little dip, right? And that's a lot of the reasons why.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest challenges I find, is like, it's so distracting. I mean, going through a deal process, distracting, and then, then you got a down quarter or down 2 quarters, and now you're trying to pretty that up, and they can become a really vicious cycle in terms of
But that's why I say that the responsibility is on both sides, right? Because I have another client right now that was going through a potential acquisition, and the seller just took forever for anything. And then at the last minute, 11th hour, they backed out. And I'm like, God, they should pay they weren't in exclusivity. They didn't have to pay a breakup fee, but it cost the company a lot. And I know that because I coach a lot of their people, and I can just see it.
Yeah. Time is the biggest cost of most deals.
Totally.
Yeah. Good. David, this has been a pleasure. If people want to find out more about you and the work that you do, what's the best way to get that information?
Yeah, just David at velocitynowllc.com. It's the easiest way.
Great. I'll make sure that the information is in the show notes so people with that. David, thank you so much for taking the time today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Take care. Thank you.